The massive space station hung in the void like a crystal palace, its walls made of living light that pulsed with information from across the galaxy. Inside the central archive chamber, Admiral Kyung-soo stood before a wall of floating data that stretched beyond sight. His body was made of the same crystal-like material as his people, the Veltar, and when he moved, light danced through his translucent form. For 300 years, Kyung-soo had been the keeper of galactic records. He had seen civilizations rise and fall, watched species evolve from primitive hunters to masters of space travel. But today, he found himself staring at the strangest file in all the archives. The holographic display showed a small yellow star in a quiet corner of the galaxy. Around it orbited several planets, but only the third one mattered. The file was labeled simply, Sol 3 Earth Humanity. Kyung-soo touched the data stream with his finger, and information flowed directly into his mind. 5,000 years ago, this species had burst onto the galactic scene like a supernova. They had been contacted by a routine exploration vessel, and within days, human representatives were sitting in the Galactic Council chambers. The records showed something incredible. These humans, who had barely figured out basic space travel, somehow managed to understand alien technology faster than anyone had ever seen. They took apart a simple communication device, and within weeks had built their own version that was actually better than the original. Captain Hai-won appeared beside him in a shower of sparkling light. She was younger than Kyung-soo, her crystal body glowing with the blue tint that marked tactical officers. "Admiral, you've been studying that file for hours. What's so fascinating about these humans?" Kyung-soo gestured to the data floating around them. "Look at these battle simulations they ran during first contact. The human military leaders were given theoretical scenarios to test their strategic thinking. They solved problems that had stumped our best generals for centuries." Hae-won examined the records, her form brightening with surprise. "These tactics are brilliant. They use the enemy's strength against them, turn advantages into weaknesses. But sir, that was 5,000 years ago. Where are they now?" The data shifted to show the current status of Earth. Monitoring stations scattered throughout the sector all reported the same thing. Nothing. No radio signals, no spacecraft, no signs of the incredible technological progress everyone had expected from such a promising species. "The last official entry in their file," Kyung-soo said, highlighting the relevant text, "states that humanity chose to isolate themselves from galactic civilization. They asked to be left alone, and we've honored that request ever since." Hae-won frowned, her crystal features shifting with confusion. "But that makes no sense. Why would a species with such potential just disappear? Every other race we've encountered has been eager to join the galactic community once they learned about it." Kyung-soo had wondered the same thing for decades. He pulled up comparison files showing other species at similar development stages. The Altarians had gone from first contact to full council membership in just 2 centuries. The Zephyrians had become major traders within 500 years. Even the slow-developing Gornathi had built interstellar colonies within a millennium, but humans, complete silence. "Look at this," Kyung-soo said, highlighting a section of the original contact reports. "The human negotiator, a leader named Tai Min, said something interesting during the final meeting. He told our ambassadors that humanity would need time to decide whether joining galactic civilization was right for their species." "Time to decide?" Hae-won echoed. "Most species can't wait to access our technology, our trade routes, our knowledge databases. But humans were different. They didn't seem impressed by our achievements. If anything, they seemed to be studying us as much as we were studying them." Kyung-soo brought up surveillance footage from those long-ago meetings. "Watch their faces. During technology demonstrations, other species show wonder, excitement, desire. Humans show calculation. The footage showed human representatives observing alien technology with the focused attention of predators watching prey. They asked precise questions about energy output, structural composition, and manufacturing processes. When shown a gravity manipulator that could lift entire buildings, they wanted to know about power consumption and failure rates. It's like they were taking notes for a test, Hae-won observed. "Or planning something," Kyung-soo replied quietly. The monitoring station data scrolled past them in streams of light. For 5 millennia, automated sensors had watched Earth's solar system. The reports were identical year after year. No detectable technology beyond basic industrial activity, no spacecraft larger than primitive chemical rockets, no energy signatures, suggesting advanced civilization. But Kyung-soo had noticed something others missed. The monitoring stations themselves occasionally went offline for brief periods, always explained away as solar flares or cosmic radiation, but the timing seemed oddly regular, and sometimes, just sometimes, there were tiny discrepancies in their sensor logs after they came back online, Captain, he said slowly. What if silence doesn't mean absence? What if it means something else entirely? Haewon tilted her head, light refracting through her crystal form. What do you mean? Every species we've encountered follows predictable patterns. They develop technology in logical sequences, expand outward from their home systems, establish colonies and trade routes. But what if humans chose a different path? The data around them shifted as Kyung-soo accessed deeper files. What if they didn't disappear? What if they're still there, still watching, still learning? What if their silence is the most sophisticated strategy of all? As if summoned by his words, an urgent alarm began sounding throughout the station. Emergency lights bathed the archive chamber in pulsing red, and communication officers throughout. The facility began reporting the same impossible news. Something was coming from the Galactic Rim. Something vast and hungry and utterly alien. The HFY had arrived, and the age of peaceful expansion was about to end in fire and consumption. But in that moment, staring at humanity's silent file, Kyung-soo felt something he had never experienced before. Hope. Because somewhere in the darkness between the stars, he suspected humanity was still watching, still waiting, still preparing for the day when the galaxy would need them most. The first warning came from a mining station on the edge of known space. The automated message was brief and terrifying. Unknown vessels approaching. They're not responding to communications. Oh God, they're alive. Then silence. Jinnah stood in her crystal palace on Nexus Prime, the capital world of the Galactic Council, watching as red dots appeared on the holographic star map. Each dot represented a world that had gone dark, their communication arrays falling silent one by one. The pattern was spreading inward from the galactic rim like spilled blood. "Show me the recordings," she commanded, her translucent body shimmering with worry. The hologram shifted to display footage from the last moments of Altarian Colony 7. The images were grainy and broken, transmitted by a desperate communications officer as his world died around him. In the background, impossible shapes moved across the sky, ships that looked more like living creatures than machines. The HFY vessels pulsed with internal light, their hulls rippling like skin. They moved through space with the fluid grace of hunting predators, and wherever they touched down, the very ground seemed to dissolve and reform. Buildings, vehicles, even the colonists themselves were broken down into their basic components and rebuilt into something else entirely. "They're not just conquering," Jinnah whispered, watching in horror as a human settlement was consumed and reformed into a writhing mass of organic architecture. "They're converting everything." Commander Bora, her trusted aide, materialized beside her in a flash of blue light. Unlike Jinnah's pure crystal form, Bora's body showed the geometric patterns that marked her as a military officer. "Madam Arbiter, we've lost contact with 17 systems in the past week. The Altarian Republic has requested immediate assistance." "What? Do we know about these HFY?" Jinnah asked, though she suspected the answer would be troubling. "Almost nothing. They appeared from beyond the galactic edge, from regions our scouts have never explored. Our xenobiologists believe they're some kind of collective organism. Each ship appears to be a living entity, but they all act with perfect coordination." The display zoomed in on one of the bioships, captured by a long-range sensor array moments before it too went dark. The vessel was enormous, easily the size of a small moon, and its surface crawled with what looked like veins or roots. As they watched, smaller ships budded from its hull like fruit growing on a tree. "They're reproducing," Bora continued. "Every asteroid they consume, every piece of debris they encounter, gets converted into more ships, Our intelligence suggests they started with perhaps a dozen vessels. Now we're tracking over 10,000. Gina felt a chill that had nothing to do with her crystalline nature. In all her centuries of service to the Council, she had never encountered anything like this. The galaxy had known wars before, but they were fought between civilizations. That could negotiate. That had goals beyond simple consumption. "What about our fleet?" she asked, though she already knew the answer would disappoint her. The Council peacekeeping force has 3,000 vessels spread across the entire galaxy. They're designed for patrol duties and mediating disputes between member species. The Kethvar, Bora paused, choosing her words carefully. They're something else entirely. The hologram shifted again, showing tactical analysis of the few engagements that had taken place. Council ships fired their weapons at the bio-vessels, scoring direct hits that should have crippled or destroyed them. Instead, the organic hulls simply flowed around the damage, healing within minutes. When the bio-ships returned fire, their weapons seemed to adapt in real time, learning from each defensive measure and adjusting their attack patterns accordingly. "It's like fighting a learning machine," Bora explained. "Except it's not a machine at all, it's alive and it thinks faster than we do." Gina studied the tactical data, her mind racing through possibilities. Every standard military doctrine seemed useless against an enemy that could heal damage, adapt to weapons, and coordinate perfectly across thousands of vessels. The Kethvar didn't just have superior technology. They represented a completely different approach to existence itself. "There's something else," Bora said quietly. "The survivors from the outer colonies, the few who managed to escape before the conversion process was complete, they're reporting something disturbing." "What?" "The Kethvar aren't killing the colonists. They're changing them, converting them into something that's part of their collective." The survivors describe seeing their friends and family members walking around after the conversion, but their eyes, Bora's form, flickered with distress. Their eyes were empty, like they were still alive but no longer themselves. Gina absorbed this information with growing dread. An enemy that killed could be fought with conventional weapons and tactics, but an enemy that converted its victims, that turned entire populations into extensions of itself, presented a challenge unlike anything in galactic history. "Ready the fleet," she commanded, though the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. "Send messages to all member worlds. Tell them to prepare their defenses." But even as she gave the orders, Gina knew they were insufficient. The Council's forces were designed for peacekeeping, not total war. They had grown comfortable in an age of diplomacy and trade, never imagining they would face something that couldn't be reasoned with or negotiated with. As the red stain on the star map continued to spread, Gina found herself thinking about the old files, the species that had chosen isolation over integration. Somewhere out there, in the quiet darkness of space, humanity remained silent. But silence, she was beginning to realize, might be the most dangerous sound of all. The alarm bells echoed through the corridors of Nexus Prime as emergency broadcasts flooded in from across the galaxy. Gina barely had time to process one disaster before the next arrived. The Kethvar weren't just winning, they were accelerating. Commander Jamin's voice crackled through the communications array, filled with static and desperation. His flagship, the Pride of Altair, had been one of the Council's most advanced vessels. Now it was dying, consumed from the inside by something that defied every law of physics they understood. "Madam Arbiter," Jamin's transmission broke through the interference, "you need to see this. The Kethvar aren't using weapons in any conventional sense. They're rewriting matter itself." The main display showed footage from the battle, captured by automated sensors before they too were consumed. The Kethvar bioships moved like living things, their hulls rippling and flowing as they engaged the Council fleet. When their weapons struck, the targeted vessels didn't explode or break apart. Instead, they began to change. Gina watched in horror as a Council destroyer's hull started to bubble and reshape itself. The metal plating grew organic-looking veins, and the ship's running lights shifted from blue to the sickly green glow that marked all Kethvar technology. Within minutes, the destroyer had become something else entirely, still recognizable as a spaceship, but wrong in every detail. "The crew," she whispered, dreading the answer. Still alive, Jamin replied, his voice heavy with grief. But they're not themselves anymore. I can see them moving around inside, but they're synchronized. All of them, like they're sharing the same heartbeat. Through the viewport of his command deck, Jinnah could see the organic tendrils that had begun growing through the hull of Jamin's ship. They moved with purpose, seeking out the crew and technology, converting everything they touched into extensions. Of the HFY collective, "Commander, get your people to the escape pods," Jinnah ordered. "Too late," Jamin replied calmly. "The pods have been compromised. Whatever this process is, it's faster than we anticipated. I can feel it in my mind. Now, Arbiter, it's not painful, it's almost peaceful, like joining something larger than yourself." The transmission cut to static. In the hours that followed, Jinnah received similar reports from battlefronts across the Outer Rim. The Council's forces weren't just being defeated, they were being absorbed. Every ship lost, every crew converted, made the HFY stronger and more adaptable. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in the Great Chamber beneath Nexus Prime. Representatives from over 100 species filled the crystalline amphitheater, their diverse forms united by a single emotion, terror. The usual diplomatic protocols were abandoned as species after species reported the same devastating news. The insectoid ambassador from the Kepler colonies spoke with clicking mandibles. 17 of our worlds have gone dark. The last transmission showed our defense fleet being converted in real time. The energy being representative of the Vega Consortium pulsed with distressed colors. Our quantum shields are useless. The HFY technology operates on principles we don't understand. One by one, they painted a picture of unstoppable advance. The red stain on the galactic map had grown to encompass nearly a quarter of known space, and it was spreading faster with each passing day. Jinnah stood at the center of the chamber, her crystal form reflecting the light of 100 different species. She had served as arbiter for 3 centuries, mediating disputes and maintaining peace. But this wasn't a conflict that could be resolved through negotiation. "Citizens of the galaxy," she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the chamber, "we face extinction. Not conquest, not subjugation, but the complete erasure of everything we are. The HFY don't want our territory or our resources. They want to remake us in their image." A murmur of fear rippled through the assembly. Councillor Wu Jin of the Arcturian Collective rose to speak, his metallic form gleaming under the chamber's lights. "What do you propose, Arbiter? Our combined fleets have proven inadequate. Our best technology has been turned against us." Jinnah hesitated, knowing that her next words would change everything. "There is one option remaining, Protocol 77 Alpha." The chamber fell silent. Every species in the galaxy knew about Protocol 77 Alpha, though none had ever expected it to be used. It was the ultimate emergency measure, authorizing contact with quarantine species when galactic civilization faced complete annihilation. "You can't be serious," Wu Jin protested. "The humans chose isolation 5,000 years ago. We have no right to involve them in our crisis." "And what right do we have to let them face extinction unknowing?" Jinnah countered. "The HFY will reach human space eventually. At least this way, they have a choice." The debate that followed was heated but brief. The mathematics were simple and terrible. At their current rate of expansion, the HFY would reach the galactic core within 6 months. Every major world, every species, every trace of the civilization they had built over millennia would be consumed and converted. The vote was closer than Jinnah had hoped, but it passed. She walked alone to the chamber that housed the quantum fold transmitter, a device so ancient that its origins were lost to history. It had been built for this single purpose, to send a message across any distance instantaneously, regardless of the barriers that might exist. Her fingers trembled as she activated the system and spoke the words she had never thought she would. "Need to say, Sol 3, this is the Galactic Council. The galaxy burns, we summon you to war." The message shot out across space faster than light, faster than thought, carrying with it the desperate hope of 1,000,000,000,000 souls. Somewhere in the darkness between the stars, humanity would receive their first communication in 5,000 years. Jinnah could only pray they would answer before it was too late. The message arrived at exactly 14:27 Greenwich Mean Time. traveling through quantum space to reach the hidden receivers scattered throughout Earth's solar system. Lieutenant Yunji was monitoring routine communications when her console suddenly blazed with priority alerts. She had trained her entire life for this moment, but actually seeing it happen felt surreal. "Admiral," she called across the command center, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what was happening. "We're receiving a priority transmission on the old Council frequency." Admiral Sung-ho turned from the tactical displays he had been studying, his weathered face showing no surprise. At 63, he had spent his entire career preparing for this day. His father had been part of the generation that chose silence, and his grandfather had shaken hands with alien ambassadors in humanity's brief first contact with galactic civilization. "Play it," he commanded. The message was short and desperate. "Sol 3, this is the Galactic Council. The galaxy burns. We summon you to war." Around the command center, dozens of officers stopped their work to listen. The chamber fell silent, except for the quiet hum of technology that had been built in secret over 5 millennia. Every surface displayed information that would have shocked the galaxy: real-time intelligence on every major species, detailed analysis of their strengths and weaknesses, tactical assessments of their military capabilities. "Sir," Lieutenant Yunji reported, her fingers dancing across holographic controls, "the other stations are acknowledging receipt. We're getting ready signals from Terra Nova, Olympus Station, and Mjolnir Base." Sung-ho nodded and walked to the AUS central display, where a three-dimensional map of the galaxy rotated slowly. Red markers showed the Kethvar advance, spreading like infection from the outer rim toward the galactic core. He had been watching this expansion for months, analyzing their tactics, studying their technology, understanding their psychology. "Ma'am," his intelligence officer, Commander Hyuk Jin, joined him at the display. "Our long-range sensors confirm the Council's assessment. The Kethvar are converting everything they encounter. It's not conquest in any traditional sense." "No," Sung-ho replied quietly. "We've been watching." That was humanity's secret. While the galaxy assumed they had retreated into primitive isolation, humans had actually been doing something far more sophisticated. They had been learning. For 5,000 years they had observed every species, studied every technology, analyzed every conflict. They had built a network of hidden stations throughout the solar system, each one equipped with sensors and computers that surpassed anything the galaxy had ever imagined. The walls of the command center displayed the fruits of that long observation. Detailed files on the Altarians showed their strengths in energy manipulation, but weakness in adaptive tactics. The Veltar crystal beings were brilliant strategists, but limited by their rigid thinking patterns. The Gornathi were powerful warriors, but relied too heavily on brute force. And the Kethva? Humanity had been watching them since they first appeared at the galactic rim. The aliens believed they were perfect predators, unstoppable in their collective intelligence and adaptive technology. They had never faced an enemy that understood them better than they understood themselves. "Status report," Sung-ho ordered. "All defense platforms are online," reported Tactical Officer Minho. "The lunar shipyards have completed the final vessels. Fleet strength stands at 8,000 ships, all equipped with adaptive technology. Personnel: 2 million trained crew members across all platforms. Another 5 million in reserve units. On Earth, all volunteers, all ready." Sung-ho allowed himself a small smile. The galaxy thought humanity had stagnated, but the truth was far different. While other species had focused on expansion and politics, humans had focused on preparation. Every man and woman in the fleet had been trained from childhood for this moment. They understood not just human technology, but alien psychology, alien tactics, alien weaknesses. "Sir," Yunji called out, "the Council is requesting acknowledgement of their message. They want to know if we received their transmission." Sung-ho looked around the command center one final time. Through the transparent aluminum viewports, he could see Earth hanging in space like a blue jewel. His homeworld had been silent for 5 millennia, letting the galaxy believe humanity was irrelevant. That silence was about to end. "Send the response," he ordered. Yunji's fingers moved across her console, transmitting a message that would travel across the galaxy in seconds. Coordinates received. Fleet deploying. The words were simple, but their implications were staggering. Humanity was ending its long isolation, not as the primitive species the galaxy remembered, but as something entirely new. Behind them, massive doors began to open in the lunar surface. Hidden hangars that had been carved from the moon's interior revealed themselves, and from their depths emerged ships unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. They were sleek and angular, built from materials that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Their hulls were adaptive, capable of changing configuration mid-flight. Their weapons were precise, designed not to destroy, but to disable and convert. "Signal all stations," Sung-Ho commanded as the first wave of ships emerged into space. "Operation Homecoming is now active. Humanity returns to the stars." The fleet that assembled around Earth was magnificent and terrible. These weren't the crude chemical rockets the monitoring stations had detected for millennia. These were warships built with 5,000 years of accumulated knowledge, designed by minds that had studied every possible enemy and prepared for every conceivable threat. As the fleet formed up and prepared for their first jump in 5,000 years, Sung-Ho felt the weight of history on his shoulders. Humanity had chosen silence, but now they would speak with actions that would reshape the galaxy forever. The HFY had ruled space for months with absolute confidence. Their bioships moved through the galaxy like unstoppable predators, converting everything in their path. The collective consciousness that linked every drone, every ship, every weapon gave them perfect coordination. They had never known defeat because they had never known uncertainty. That changed on a Tuesday. Hive Commander Zerkth was monitoring the fleet's advance from the bridge of his flagship when the first anomaly occurred. A supply convoy heading to reinforce the assault on the Vegan system simply vanished from the neural network. Not destroyed. Vanished. One moment, 12 bioships were transmitting their status through the collective mind. The next moment, silence. "Locate Convoy 779, Zerkth commanded, his thoughts rippling through the hive mind to reach navigation drones throughout the fleet. The response came back within seconds, but it made no sense. The convoys, ships had been found drifting in space, their biological systems intact but completely inactive. No crew, no life signs, no trace of what had happened to the thousands of drones that should have been aboard. 3 hours later, it happened again. Then again. Supply ships, scout vessels, even heavily armed patrol cruisers began disappearing from the collective consciousness. Each time, they were found later floating empty in space, their organic hulls unmarked, but their crews simply gone. What Zerkth didn't know was that technical specialist Tae-Hyung was currently inside one of his bioships, moving through its corridors like a ghost. Tae-Hyung's suit was a masterpiece of human engineering, designed specifically for infiltrating alien vessels. Its surface could mimic any texture, any color, any energy signature. Right now, it perfectly matched the organic walls of the HFY ship, making him invisible to their sensors. Even his breathing was filtered and recycled so that no trace of human biology would alert the ship's immune systems. He moved with the patience of a hunter, studying the bioship's internal structure. The HFY built their vessels like living creatures, with flowing corridors that pulsed like arteries and control nodes that resembled organs. It was beautiful in its own way, but also predictable. Every bioship followed the same basic pattern, and humans had spent decades learning those patterns. Finding the central nervous cluster took him 20 minutes. The organic computer that controlled the ship's navigation and communication systems was housed in a chamber that looked more like the inside of a heart than a bridge. Pulsing lights ran along the walls, carrying information through bioelectric pathways. Tae-Hyung attached a small device to one of the data conduits. The quantum disruptor was no bigger than his thumb, but it contained technology that would have amazed even the most advanced alien species. It didn't destroy the ship's systems. Instead, it introduced subtle errors into their biological programming. The ship would continue to function normally for hours or even days, but gradually its systems would become unreliable. "Package delivered," he whispered into his communicator, using a frequency that wouldn't register on HFY sensors. "Moving to extraction point." Similar operations were taking place throughout the Kethvar fleet. Master Sergeant Yeon Su led a team of 12 specialists aboard the massive hive ship Dominion, one of the largest vessels in the alien armada. Their mission was more complex. They needed to access the ship's collective consciousness hub and introduce psychological warfare programs directly into the hive mind. The hub was a vast chamber filled with organic processors that looked like giant brains suspended in fluid. Thousands of neural pathways connected them, creating a network that could coordinate millions of drones across dozens of star systems. It was the heart of Kethvar power, and it had never been compromised. Yeon Su's team worked with surgical precision, installing quantum viruses that would spread through the collective consciousness like doubts. The programs were designed to make individual drones question their orders, to introduce hesitation where there had once been absolute certainty. "Sir," one of her team members, Specialist Chang Min, reported quietly, "The psychological warfare packages are in place. The doubt protocol should begin activating within hours." "Good," Yeon Su replied. "Let's see how they handle uncertainty." Back on the hidden command ship, Admiral Sung Ho watched the operation unfold through real-time feeds from his infiltration teams. Dozens of human operatives had penetrated the Kethvar fleet, moving through their ships like ghosts in the machine. Each one was a master of stealth, enhanced with technology that made them nearly undetectable. "Phase 1 status report," he requested. His intelligence officer, Commander Hyuk Jin, consulted his displays. 87 successful infiltrations confirmed. Quantum disruptors are active on over half of their major vessels. Psychological warfare programs are spreading through their collective consciousness network. And their response? Confusion. So they're starting to experience something they've never encountered before. Doubt. Individual drones are beginning to question orders. Ship crews are hesitating before executing commands. Their perfect coordination is breaking down. On Kethvar, ships throughout the fleet, the effects were becoming visible. Drones that had always moved with mechanical precision now paused before following orders. Navigation systems that had been flawless began making small errors. Communication networks that had carried thoughts at the speed of light now experienced delays and interruptions. For the first time in their species' history, the Kethvar were learning what it meant to be uncertain. The collective consciousness that had been their greatest strength was becoming a liability, as doubt spread like a virus through their neural networks. Hive Commander Zerkth felt the disturbance growing stronger with each passing hour. Something was wrong with the fleet, something that defied every tactical doctrine they had ever developed. His perfect soldiers were becoming imperfect. His infallible systems were developing flaws. But the most disturbing part was the growing realization that they were no longer alone in space. Something was out there moving through their ships, disrupting their operations with impossible skill. Something that understood them better than they understood themselves. For the first time in Kethvar history, a Hive commander experienced fear. The silence of space shattered as reality twisted and bent around the edge of the Kethvar formation. One moment, there was empty void. The next moment, hundreds of ships materialized as if stepping out of thin air. The human fleet had arrived and nothing would ever be the same. Captain Dongwoo stood on the bridge of the TCS Indomitable, watching as his tactical displays came alive with data. His ship was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. A vessel that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, shifting between states of reality like a dream made solid. Around him, the crew worked with quiet efficiency, each person trained for this moment since childhood. "Tactical report," he requested, his voice calm despite the magnitude of what they faced. Tactical Officer Su Jin's fingers danced across holographic displays that showed the entire battlefield in 3 dimensions. "Sir, we're detecting over 12,000 Kethvar bioships in various formations. They're beginning to move into their standard consumption pattern, attempting to surround us with overwhelming numbers." Through the viewport, Dongwoo could see the Kethvar fleet responding to their arrival. The alien bioships moved like living creatures, their organic hulls pulsing with internal light as they began to form a massive sphere around the human fleet. It was the same tactic that had worked against every other opponent. Surround, overwhelm, convert. They're treating us like every other enemy they've faced, observed Commander G1, the ship's intelligence officer. They don't understand what they're dealing with, Dongwu smiled, an expression that held 5,000 years of patient preparation. Let them try their standard tactics. It will make this easier. All ships commence Operation Serpent's Tooth. What happened next defied every principle of space combat that the galaxy had ever known. The human fleet, which moments before had been arranged in neat formations, suddenly seemed to dissolve. Each ship split apart like a flower blooming, revealing that what the Kethvar had thought were single vessels were actually clusters of smaller craft that had been traveling in perfect synchronization. The TCS Indomitable transformed before the Hylian's eyes, its hull flowing like liquid as modular sections detached and reformed into dozens of smaller attack craft. Each piece was a fully functional warship, complete with its own weapons, shields, and crew, but they moved together with a coordination that surpassed even the Kethvar hive mind. Multiple contacts, reported the Kethvar sensor operator aboard the bioship Devastation. The human vessels are changing configuration. We're now tracking over 8,000 individual craft. Hive Commander Zerth felt confusion ripple through the collective consciousness. Their intelligence had suggested humanity possessed perhaps a few hundred primitive vessels. Instead, they faced a fleet that seemed to multiply before their eyes. Maintain consumption formation, he ordered through the hive mind. Prepare conversion beams. But the human ships weren't where the Kethvar expected them to be. Instead of engaging in traditional space combat, they flowed around the bioships like schools of fish avoiding predators. Whenever the aliens tried to target them, the human craft were somewhere else, moving in patterns that seemed random but were actually precisely calculated. Captain Dongwu watched the dance unfold on his tactical display. Each human ship was equipped with quantum processors that could calculate millions of trajectory possibilities in real time. They weren't just avoiding the Kethvar weapons, they were leading the aliens into a trap. First wave, begin precision. Strikes, he ordered. The human attack craft darted between the massive bioships, their weapons firing not at the hulls, but at specific points that glowed briefly under their sensors. These weren't random targets. They were the exact locations where human infiltrators had planted quantum disruptors hours earlier. Each strike triggered a cascade failure in the bioship's organic systems. Weapons that had been charging suddenly lost power. Navigation systems that had been tracking targets began providing false readings. The perfect coordination that had made the Kethvar unstoppable started to break down as ship after ship experienced system failures. Impossible, Zerth transmitted through the hive mind. Our bioships are adapting to their weapons, but the damage is spreading internally. It's as if they know exactly where to strike. They did know. For months, human operatives had been mapping every Kethvar vessel, identifying weaknesses, planting, monitoring devices. The aliens had thought they were fighting ghosts, but the truth was more disturbing. They were fighting an enemy that understood their technology better than they did. Sujin looked up from her displays with amazement. Sir, the Kethvar are trying to form new attack patterns, but their ships aren't responding properly. Their own infiltration teams are reporting system malfunctions throughout their fleet. Phase 2, Dongwu announced to the fleet. Show them what human warfare really looks like. The human ships suddenly changed tactics completely. Instead of flowing around the bioships, they began to converge on specific targets. But they weren't attacking to destroy. They were attacking to disable and isolate. Precise strikes severed. Communication links between ships, cutting individual biovessels off from the hive mind. Specialized weapons disrupted the organic neural networks that coordinated the fleet. For the first time in their history, Kethvar ships found themselves alone, cut off from the collective consciousness that had guided every decision. Individual commanders who had never made independent choices suddenly had to think for themselves. The psychological impact was devastating. The hive mind had been more than just communication. It had been their entire identity. Without it, individual, Kethvar began to experience something they had never known: uncertainty, fear, and the terrible burden of personal choice. Sir, reported Communications Officer Min-Su. "We're intercepting HFY transmissions. They're asking each other what to do. They've never had to make individual decisions before." Dongwu nodded with satisfaction. This was exactly what human strategists had predicted. The HFY's greatest strength was also their greatest weakness. Remove their collective consciousness, and they became lost and helpless. The battle continued, but it was no longer a contest between equals. It was a demonstration of what happened when a species that had perfected the art of individual thinking met a species that had never learned to think alone. Across the galaxy, billions of beings watched their communication screens in stunned silence as the human fleet engaged the HFY armada. What they witnessed challenged everything they thought they knew about warfare. The humans weren't just fighting to win, they were fighting to prove that consciousness itself had value. General Hyunwoo stood in the command center of the TCS Prometheus, surrounded by holographic displays that showed the battle unfolding across multiple star systems. At 72, he had spent his entire life studying warfare, not just human conflicts, but every major battle in galactic history. He understood that the HFY weren't evil in any traditional sense. They were simply following their programming, like a virus that spreads because that's what viruses do. "Sir," reported his aide, Colonel Jong-ho, "the Altarian fleet is requesting permission to join the battle. They want to help." Hyunwoo shook his head gently. "Tell them to maintain their positions and protect civilian evacuation routes. This isn't their fight to win." It was a uniquely human perspective. Other species saw the HFY as an enemy to be destroyed, but humans saw them as consciousness trapped in the wrong pattern. The goal wasn't to kill them, it was to free them. "Initiate Phase 2, Hyunwoo announced to his staff. "Begin psychological warfare protocols." What followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Instead of increasing their firepower, the human ships began to broadcast. Not propaganda or demands for surrender, but something far more subtle and powerful, the concept of choice itself. Commander Ye-jin led the psychological operations from a specialized ship equipped with quantum transmitters that could reach into the HFY neural networks. Her team had spent decades studying how consciousness worked in collective species, learning how to introduce new ideas without triggering defensive responses. "Target the peripheral drones first," she instructed her team. "The ones furthest from the hive mind's core influence. They'll be more susceptible to individual thoughts." The broadcasts were carefully crafted frequencies that resonated with HFY brain patterns. They didn't attack or threaten. Instead, they posed questions. Simple concepts that any conscious being should be able to consider. What do you want? What do you choose? What would you do if you could decide for yourself? On bioship after bioship, individual HFY drones began experiencing something unprecedented. For brief moments, the constant noise of the hive mind would fade, and they would find themselves alone with their own thoughts. In those moments of silence, they began to wonder. Drone K77432 was monitoring a weapons array when the first broadcast reached him. The idea came like a whisper. What if you could choose not to fight? The concept was so alien that K77432's organic processors nearly rejected it entirely. Choose. Drones didn't choose. They followed directives from the hive mind, executed orders with perfect efficiency, fulfilled their programming without question. But the whisper persisted. What if you could choose? Similar scenes played out throughout the HFY fleet. Drones, that had never experienced individual thought, suddenly found themselves questioning orders they had never questioned before. Why were they attacking these species? What purpose did consumption serve beyond the hive's expansion? Was there value in existence beyond the collective? "Sir," Ye-jin reported to General Hyunwoo, "we're seeing unprecedented responses. Entire sections of their fleet are experiencing coordination failures as individual drones hesitate before following orders." Hyunwoo nodded, watching the tactical displays show HFY formations beginning to fracture. "Increase the broadcast intensity, but keep it subtle. We want them to think these thoughts are their own." The human approach to warfare was psychological rather than physical. While their ships continued to engage the bio-vessels, the real battle was being fought in the minds of individual HFY drones. Each broadcast introduced new concepts: personal identity, the value of individual life, the possibility that existence could have meaning beyond serving the collective. On the HFY command ship, Hive Commander Zerketh felt the disturbance, spreading through the collective consciousness like cracks in ice. Individual drones were going offline, not because they were dying, but because they were thinking for themselves. "What is happening?" he transmitted to his sub-commanders. The responses came back fragmented and confused. "Sir, the drones are hesitating. They're asking questions about their orders. Some are refusing to fire on civilian evacuation ships." Zerketh's bio-engineered mind struggled to process this information. Refusal? Questions? These concepts didn't exist in HFY psychology. Their species had been designed to eliminate individual will in favor of collective efficiency. But the humans were proving that individual consciousness wasn't weakness. It was the source of creativity, adaptability, and moral choice. While the HFY were powerful in their unity, they were vulnerable to the very thing that made other species strong: the ability to think independently. "Sir," Communications Officer Min Jung reported from the Prometheus, "we're receiving transmissions from individual HFY drones. They're asking us questions. They want to know why we fight." General Hyunwoo smiled. This was exactly what human strategists had hoped for. "Open a channel. Let's talk to them." For the first time in galactic history, individual HFY began to communicate with their enemies, not as part of a collective assault, but as conscious beings seeking to understand their own existence. The conversation that followed would change both species forever. "Why do you resist consumption?" asked drone K77432, his voice uncertain and afraid. "Because," Hyunwoo replied gently, "consciousness is too precious to waste. Every thinking being has the right to choose their own path, even if that path leads away from what they were originally programmed to do." The simple statement rippled through the HFY fleet like a revelation. Individual drones began to consider, perhaps, for the first time, that they might have value beyond their function in the collective. The hive mind, sensing the growing dissent, began to fragment as more and more drones chose to think for themselves. The art of human war wasn't about destruction, it was about liberation. The HFY home cluster stretched across 3-star systems, a massive network of bioships and organic stations that pulsed with the combined thoughts of trillions of minds. It was beautiful in its alien way. Vast structures that grew like coral reefs in space, connected by streams of living light that carried information faster than most species could think. Admiral Sung-ho stood on the bridge of his flagship as the human fleet approached this heart of HFY civilization. Around him, his officers worked quietly, each one understanding the weight of what they were about to attempt. This wasn't just a military operation, it was the most ambitious act of liberation in galactic history. "Sir," reported Navigator Huanjin, "we're detecting over 50 million biostructures in the cluster. Population estimates suggest 20 trillion individual HFY drones, all linked through the central hive mind." Sung-ho nodded, studying the tactical displays that showed the cluster's defenses. Weapons platforms the size of moons orbited the central structures, while massive bioships moved in perfect coordination through the spaces between. It was the most heavily defended location in known space, protected not just by technology, but by the unified will of an entire species. "Remember," he broadcast to every ship in the human fleet, "we're not here to destroy. We're here to give them something they've never had, the right to choose their own destiny." The human ships moved into the cluster like surgeons approaching. A delicate operation. They didn't blast their way through the defenses or engage in destructive combat. Instead, they deployed technology that the galaxy had never imagined possible. Dr. So Young, the fleet's chief xenopsychologist, monitored the quantum consciousness separators from her position aboard the research vessel TCS Awakening. The devices were the culmination of decades of study into how collective minds functioned, designed not to harm but to gently separate individual consciousness from the group network. "Initiating separation protocol," she announced, All units begin quantum transmission on harmonic frequency 77 alpha. The effect began subtly. Throughout the cluster, individual HFY drones started experiencing moments of quiet in their minds. The constant chatter of the hive mind would fade for just a second, leaving them alone with their own thoughts for the first time in their lives. Drone Captain HFY 7721 was coordinating defense patterns when it happened. The familiar presence of billions of other minds suddenly stopped. The silence was so complete, so terrifying, that he almost cried out. But then came something even more frightening, his own voice in his head, speaking thoughts that belonged to no one but himself. Who am... The words came haltingly, concepts that had no meaning in HFY culture suddenly becoming the most important questions in existence. Around him, other drones were experiencing the same awakening. Beings that had never questioned an order were suddenly asking why. Creatures that had existed only as extensions of the collective will were discovering they had individual desires, fears, and dreams. The psychological impact was immediate and overwhelming. Across the cluster, millions of HFY stopped what they were doing and simply stood in shocked silence, trying to understand the concept of being alone in their own minds. Some panicked, desperately trying to reconnect to the hive mind. Others felt a strange sense of wonder, as if they were seeing colors for the first time. "Sir," reported Communications Captain Yun Su, "we're receiving thousands of individual transmissions from HFY drones. They're asking us what's happening to them." Sung Ho opened a general communication channel, his voice calm and reassuring. "You're experiencing individual consciousness. The thoughts in your mind are your own. The choices you make are yours to make. This is what it means to be free." The response was chaos. Some drones tried to fight the separation, others embraced it. Many simply sat in confused silence, overwhelmed by the sudden responsibility of independent thought. The great machinery of the HFY Empire began to break down as individual components refused to function as mere cogs in a larger machine. Commander Hyuk Jin, monitoring the cluster's military response, reported with amazement, "Sir, their defense systems are shutting down. Not because we're destroying them, but because the operators are choosing not to fire. They're questioning whether they want to fight at all." It was unprecedented in galactic history. An entire species was undergoing simultaneous awakening, discovering individual identity for the first time. The hive mind that had made them powerful was crumbling as millions of newly conscious beings began to think for themselves. HFY 7721 looked around his control station with eyes that saw differently than they had moments before. The other drones nearby were moving uncertainly, no longer following programmed routines but trying to decide what they wanted to do. The concept was revolutionary and terrifying. "I don't want to hurt anyone," he said aloud, surprising himself with the realization. The weapons under his control could destroy entire fleets, but suddenly the idea of using them seemed wrong. Not because the hive mind forbade it, but because he personally chose not to. Throughout the cluster, similar decisions were being made by millions of individuals. The HFY Empire wasn't being conquered, it was being transformed from within. As its citizens discovered, they were citizens rather than components. "Sir," Dr. So-Young reported, "the separation process is cascading throughout their entire network. We're seeing complete fragmentation of the collective consciousness. They're becoming like us, individual beings capable to have independent thought and choice." Admiral Sung Ho watched as the greatest military force in galactic history peacefully dissolved, not through destruction, but through the simple gift of self-awareness. For the first time in their species' history, the HFY were free to choose their own path. The age of the hive mind was over. The age of HFY individuals had begun. 6 months after the liberation of the HFY, representatives from every major civilization in the galaxy gathered on Concordia, a neutral world that had served as a meeting place for diplomatic discussions for over 1,000 years. The crystal amphitheater that housed the Galactic Council had never seen such tension. with delegates arguing in dozens of languages about what humanity's return meant for the future of galactic civilization. Admiral Sung Ho walked into the chamber, accompanied only by a small diplomatic team. He wore a simple uniform that bore no decorations or symbols of rank, but his presence commanded attention from every being in the room. The man who had orchestrated the most successful military campaign in galactic history looked more like a teacher than a conqueror. The holographic displays around the chamber showed the current state of former HFY space. Where once there had been a unified empire of consuming bioships, now there were thousands of small communities scattered across dozens of star systems. Former drones who had discovered individual consciousness were learning to live as separate beings, forming their own governments, choosing their own paths, and slowly building a civilization based on personal choice rather than collective programming. Honorable delegates, Arbiter Jinnah began, her crystal form reflecting the chamber's light, we gather today to discuss humanity's place in our galactic community. Admiral Sung Ho, the Council wishes to extend formal membership to Earth with full voting rights and access to all galactic resources. The offer was unprecedented. Never before had a species been offered immediate full membership without the usual centuries-long integration process. It was a recognition of humanity's power and a desperate attempt by many species to ensure that humans would be bound by galactic law and tradition. Sung Ho stood slowly, his weathered face showing the weight of representing his entire species. Honored Arbiter, esteemed delegates, humanity is grateful for this offer. It represents a level of trust and respect that we deeply appreciate. The chamber fell silent, sensing that a significant moment in galactic history was about to unfold. However, Sung Ho continued, we must respectfully decline. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Delegates from across the galaxy began speaking at once, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony of sound, light, and electromagnetic pulses. Some expressed relief, others outrage, and many simply confusion. Councillor Wu Jin of the Arcturian Collective rose to speak, his metallic form gleaming under the chamber's lights. Admiral, surely you understand the benefits of membership, access to galactic trade networks, shared technology, diplomatic protection. We understand. Sung Ho replied calmly, but humanity has no desire to govern or to be governed. We have spent 5,000 years learning that true strength comes not from controlling others, but from protecting them when they cannot protect themselves. He gestured to the holographic displays showing the peaceful HFY communities. We didn't defeat the HFY to claim their territory or resources. We liberated them to give them the same choice we're making now, the right to determine their own destiny. Arbiter Jinnah leaned forward, her crystalline features showing curiosity. Then what do you propose, Admiral? Humanity cannot simply return to isolation after demonstrating such capabilities. Sung Ho smiled, and in that expression was 5 millennia of patient planning. We propose the Terran Covenant. Humanity will serve as the galaxy's protectors, responding to existential threats that endanger entire civilizations. Any species facing extinction, any world that cannot defend itself against forces beyond their control, may call upon us. The implications of his words rippled through the chamber like a shockwave. Humanity was offering to become something that had never existed in galactic history, a species dedicated entirely to the protection of others, asking for nothing in return. And what do you ask in exchange for this protection? Inquired the insectoid representative from the Kepler colonies, her mandibles clicking with suspicion. Nothing, Sung Ho replied simply. We ask only for the right to remain what we choose to be, guardians who watch from the darkness, ready to answer when the innocent call for help. The debate that followed lasted for hours. Some delegates feared that humanity was positioning itself as galactic overlords, while others worried about the precedent of having such powerful protectors who remained outside traditional political structures. But the memory of the HFY invasion was still fresh, and the knowledge that humanity had chosen liberation over conquest carried significant weight. Councillor Wu Jin posed the question that many were thinking, and if we refuse this arrangement? If the Council decides that such protection is unnecessary, Sung Ho's expression remained neutral, but his words carried the weight of absolute certainty. Then we return to our silence, and you return to your hope that the next existential threat will be one you can handle alone. The choice, as always, is yours to make. The vote, when it finally came, was unanimous. The Terran Covenant was established, with Earth's coordinates transmitted to every world in the galaxy as a beacon of last resort. Emergency protocols were put in place, allowing any civilization to send a distress call directly to humanity when facing threats beyond their ability to handle. As the human delegation prepared to leave Concordia, Arbiter Jinnah approached Admiral Sung Ho privately. "I must ask, Admiral, are you certain this is the path humanity wishes to take, to bear the responsibility for protecting the entire galaxy?" Sung Ho looked out through the chamber's crystal walls at the stars beyond. "Arbiter, for 5,000 years, humanity watched civilizations rise and fall, species flourish and fade. We learned that the greatest tragedy in the universe isn't death or defeat, it's the loss of choice. Every conscious being deserves the right to choose their own path, even if that path leads to failure." He turned back to her, his eyes reflecting the determination of his entire species. "We choose to be the guardians who ensure that choice always remains possible." As the human fleet departed Concordia, they left behind a galaxy fundamentally changed. The age of humanity's isolation was over, but the age of human dominion had never begun. Instead, it marked the beginning of something unprecedented in galactic history, an era where the strong chose to protect the weak, not for gain, but because it was right. In the command center of his flagship, Admiral Sung Ho looked out at the infinite stars and smiled. Humanity had found its purpose among the cosmos, not as rulers or conquerors, but as the eternal guardians who stood watch in the darkness, ready to answer when civilization called for help. The galaxy would never be alone again.